Okay. So I'd like to welcome everyone to Humanist Canada's webinar series. Tonight we're going to be talking about an introduction to secular humanism, history, practice, and values with our speaker, Daniel Dacombe. Daniel is a secular humanist, writer, public speaker, and PhD candidate studying religious deconversion and de-identification. Since 2020, he has been an active member and volunteer at Humanist Canada, and for the past 2 years has been the host of the Voice of Canadian Humanism podcast. His background as a former seminary student, ministry professional, and Christian speaker gives him a unique perspective on religious belief and behavior and informs his interviews with academics, advocates, and other experts in the fields of religion and secularism. He is passionate about interfaith dialogue with people who share values with humanism and are willing to work together for the benefit of humanity's shared future. With that, I will hand it over to Daniel.
Thank you, Janely. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, sounds good. Um, Thank you for having me to do this webinar. I've been looking forward to it for a while. Um, I have been a member of Humanist Canada for I think about 5 years and have been volunteering since shortly after starting and have been doing the podcast the last 2 years. So it's been really great to start to get to know more of you and more of the people who show up to these webinars and show up to our meetings and the general meeting and everybody else who's involved, especially those who are involved in creating humanist community across Canada, wherever they happen to be. That's been really great to get to know all of you. So very happy for this opportunity to do something live and visual, not just the podcast where it's usually very good conversations, but I don't get to see anybody while I'm doing it. So just gonna briefly describe what we're gonna talk about today. I'm gonna start by talking about what humanism is, just give an overview of the subject. And then I'm going to talk about the history of humanism, where it came from and where it's going, and then talk about the shared values and shared future that we have, not just with each other as humanists, but with other communities in Canada and around the world who all have a vested interest in the same kinds of futures that we'd like to build. This is a conversation that I think is especially relevant these days as the world is changing rapidly, and uh, many things that we took for granted have stopped being the case, and we'll get into that very shortly. So just to introduce myself, and generally, thank you for the introduction. My name is Daniel Dacombe, and I grew up in a Christian home in Manitoba. And when I was a young adult, I went off to Bible college and then seminary. I spent time in Christian ministry. And after many years of that, I started a slow process of leaving religion and then trying to figure out what life was going to look like after I was gone. And when I was gone from religion, I made many new friends and learned a lot of new things. One of the things I learned is that I was a humanist and that I'd probably been a humanist for a long time, even though I didn't have the words to describe it. So one of the things we're going to talk about today, even though many of you have been with Humanist Canada for a long time and are very well versed in this, is we're going to get back to basics. We're going to talk a bit about where humanism came from and why there's a lot more humanists out there than probably realize it. So to start off, what is humanism? This is the section where we're going to discuss what humanism means and what it has meant in the past and what it is continuing to contribute to in our world today. And we're going to start off with some important definitions. Many of these may be familiar to you, but some might be new. And we're going to have other definitions as we keep going. I'll use these words off and on throughout the presentation, so it's good to establish them now. The first definition is theism. This is the belief in at least one deity or divine being. So Christianity, Islam, Judaism are all theistic religions. Then there's pantheism, the belief that the universe and nature are identical to the divine. And Hinduism would be an example of a pantheistic religion. Then there's atheism. This is just the absence of belief in the existence of deities. It doesn't necessarily mean that someone is actively disbelieving. It might just mean that they haven't thought about it, they aren't interested in it, or they just have never really been very convinced. There's a lot more people who are what some might call apatheists, where they just don't care if there's a God or not. And we're seeing a lot more of that these days. Then there's agnosticism. This is not a middle point between theism and atheism. This is actually a philosophical stance about knowledge. It's the idea that we can't know for certain if there's deities or not. A lot of people who describe themselves as atheists also describe themselves as agnostics. Um, Richard Dawkins is one. Dr. Bart Ehrman, the New Testament scholar who is also an atheist, says he's an agnostic as well. And myself as well would probably describe myself as an agnostic atheist. Um, some people believe that agnosticism means that uh, you are almost convinced that there's a god or gods, and that's not really the case. It might just mean that you are trying to be humble about the level of knowledge that you have, which I think is always a good idea. Then there's naturalism. Sometimes this is a term that trips people up because it sounds a lot like being a naturist or a naturist, which I think means nudist. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a naturalist, which means that you believe that only natural forces operate within the universe. This is in contrast to believing in supernatural forces. So these are some of our basic definitions, and now we're going to define secular humanism. So secular humanism is what we would call a life stance. And the definition of life stance is the style and content of an individual's or community's relationship with that which is of utmost importance, the presuppositions and commitments of this, and the consequences for living which flow from it. This is from Dr. Harry Stopes Rowe from the British Humanist Association. This would be similar to the philosophical term worldview. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce the German word. Secular humanism is a naturalistic life stance, generally both agnostic and atheist, built on long traditions of reason and ethics from around the world. If people are asking you what secular humanism is, this is a fairly decent definition. Uh, Secular humanism is also based on a number of foundational values, and some of these values are described in the Amsterdam Declaration. So the first value is that humanists strive to be ethical. That means that they accept that morality is inherent to the human condition. It's grounded in our ability to suffer and flourish, and it's motivated by the benefits of helping others, not harming them. It's based on reason and compassion, not based on some moral authority given down by a deity of some kind. We believe that people have worth and dignity, and that every human has the right to the greatest possible freedom and the fullest possible development compatible with the rights of others. So wherever we are not interfering with others, we should be allowed to be free and develop and grow and make our own decisions. So because of this, humanism tends to support things like peace and democracy, the rule of law, and universal legal human rights. It rejects all forms of racism and prejudice and the injustices that arise from it, and instead tries to promote flourishing and fellowship of humanity in all of its diversity. This does mean that personal liberty and the duty to society have to be held in balance. And there are many long philosophical conversations about how that can play out over specific issues in society these days, but that is the foundation. We aren't getting our morality from a book or from a wise person. We are getting it from each other and from ourselves. The second is that humanists strive to be rational. So we believe that our problems as a species can probably be mostly solved by us. Human action and reason are the sources of solutions, not wisdom from a religious tradition. So we advocate for the application of science and free inquiry to the problems that we face. And while science can provide the means, our values, human values, must define the ends of what our rational development can bring. So we want to use science and technology to enhance our well-being, not to be destructive with it. The third value is that we strive for fulfillment in our lives. We aren't nihilists necessarily. We aren't doom and gloom. We actually think that individual joy and fulfillment are really important and are of paramount importance for everybody. We think that personal development and creative and ethical living are things worth engaging in for their own sake. So this means that humanists value artistic creativity and literature and art, the beauty of the natural world, individual and communal activities that we conduct together, the efforts we take to make our world a better place. All of these things that give us fulfillment are part of that value. We also believe that humanism meets the widespread demand for a source of meaning and purpose, standing as an alternative to dogmatic religion, authoritarian nationalism, tribal sectarianism, and selfish nihilism. So we believe that human well-being is something that we can commit to, but that our particular opinions that we have right now might not be well, the values that we have many years from now in the future. So we shouldn't expect that reason and morality and ethics and rationality will be remaining frozen in time. We're going to continue to develop as a species. Nobody is infallible. Uh, we need to go through a process of observation and learning and scientific inquiry to gain knowledge, and that knowledge can help enhance our lives on a daily basis and create a better future for all of us. Um, this means that we don't want to avoid scrutiny on our own views or to impose our views on the rest of humanity. We are trying to instead create an exchange of ideas to cooperate with people of different beliefs who share our values and who all want to help with building a better world. And so, because of this, and because of the fact that we believe that we have the ability to solve our problems as a species without supernatural intervention or superstition, we want to work with those who are willing to share those values and try to build a better life for all of us, not just for humanists, but for everybody. Um, so that's the basics of the Amsterdam Declaration, which Humanist International has been developing, I think, repeatedly over the last half century. And we also have a definition of humanism from Humanist Canada. And I'm not going to go through the whole history of Humanist Canada. I think it's a long and illustrious history, but I suspect we might have a webinar about that at some point too. So I'll just read this. Humanism is a progressive philosophy of life based on a profound respect for human dignity and the conviction that human beings are ultimately accountable to themselves and society for their actions. It is a secular worldview that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical and meaningful lives. And typically, when people ask me, what does it mean to be a humanist? I send them this link to the Humanist Canada website. I also have been, over the years, collecting authors and speakers and other famous thinkers who are humanists and who have unique perspectives on what humanism has meant to them. So this is British philosopher A.C. Grayling, and a quote of his that I especially like is, "For we live in deeds, not years, in thoughts, not breaths, and our time should be counted in the throbs of our hearts as we love and help, learn and strive, and make from our own talents whatever can increase the stock of the world's good." And if you'd like to hear more from A.C. Grayling, he will be at the World Humanist Congress this August in Ottawa. Then there's Betty Chambers, who's an American activist for many years for humanism and secularism. And what she said was, "Humanism is the light of my life and the fire in my soul. It is the deep felt conviction in every fiber of my being that human love is a power far transcending the relentless onward rush of our largely deterministic cosmos. All human life must seek a reason for existence within the bounds of an uncaring physical world, and it is love coupled with empathy, democracy, and a commitment to selfless service which undergirds the faith of a humanist." So some might object to the word faith being used there, but I certainly don't. I thought she had a very good way with words, and I really love this quote. Then this is a quote from Leo Igwe, who is a Nigerian activist and atheist. He says, "Humanism is a way of thinking and living that emphasizes the agency of human beings. Humanism stresses the fact that we, human beings, are capable of changing the world, that we have the power to make a difference in our lives, both individually and collectively, without recourse to some outside force." I especially like this one because it reminded me of Carl Sagan's Pale Blue Dot speech, which if you haven't heard, go look that one up as well. You may also have read Kurt Vonnegut, one of my favorite authors, and someone who I had a lot of respect and admiration for. He says, I'm a humanist, which means in part that I have tried to behave decently without expectations of rewards or punishments after I'm dead, which is a very simple and straightforward way to say it. And I've had several conversations with friends who've stayed religious while I wasn't, and when they asked, but don't you want there to be something good after you die? I would say, well, sure, that'd be great, but me wanting it doesn't make it true. And when those conversations come up, I think of Kurt and his work. And then just because I'm a bit of a nerd, I have Doctor Who here as well. Obviously not a humanist activist or even a real person, but a fictional character that I do appreciate and whose words have brought me comfort in some tough times. And so, in one of the episodes where Peter Capaldi, this British actor, portrays the Doctor, and if you don't know who Doctor Who is, we'll do a whole other webinar about that in the future. He says human progress isn't measured by industry; it's measured by the value you place on a life, an unimportant life, a life without privilege. That's what defines an age. That's what defines a species. And that's always made me think about the value that I place on others, and if I'm worthy of being someone that the Doctor would appreciate and approve of as a humanist. So more to come on that, I think, someday. For now, I'd like to move on into the history of humanism, which is uh, not as linear as we might expect, because humanism wasn't firmly established, or it doesn't even have a single defined definition, as you saw from around the world. We have our Amsterdam Declaration, we have the Humanist Canada Declaration. There's other authors who have written at length about humanism, and we might not recognize the things they say about it. Um, and I'm thinking of the book *Sapiens* by Yuval Noah Harari, which was a very good book, but his definition of humanism was, I think, very different and something that we wouldn't recognize. So, looking at the history of humanism, uh, the origins of it are all back in the Greco-Roman era and travel forward through the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, till they finally reached us in the 21st century after going through many different uh, areas and levels of development, usually not by people who we would call secular humanists or atheists today, because for most of human history, people have been religious. And as a result, much of the thinking that got done in the humanist uh, arena was developed by those religious thinkers, even though they developed many ideas that were based on a foundation of secular ideas or secular public squares. So in a moment, we're just going to move on to the Greco-Roman era and then continue forward. So the Greco-Roman era was defined by a tradition of ethical debate in philosophy. So there are many different Greek ethical schools. Um, there's a couple of them here. So Stoicism, which was based on ideas of wisdom and justice and courage, but also temperance and the idea of living a virtuous and fulfilling life by focusing on understanding your actions and having self-control and being measured as you move through life. Uh, Neoplatonism was a school of thought that emphasized divine ideals and the soul's ascent into beauty and the beauty of the natural world, but that individual development was also based on reason and contemplation. So many of these concepts would be foundational later for thinkers who would start to incorporate them into their faith or into their personal philosophies and create the ideals that we have in humanism today. If you're looking to do more reading, I recommend thinkers like Cicero, Seneca the Younger, and Marcus Aurelius. Marcus Aurelius's meditations are gathered together and often are found in bookstores. He is very famous for being part of the Stoic philosophy school, and much of those writings have been uh, included in other textbooks or courses on philosophy or courses on Stoicism, or even in some of the books written about humanism over the years. So Marcus Aurelius and Cicero and Seneca the Younger are good places to start. Then there was the Renaissance, and a lot of things happened very quickly during the Renaissance. One of them was the uh, the reemergence of Greek thought into uh, common understanding and common language and common debate. So Greek philosophy being revived didn't happen in isolation from other schools of thought or other religious traditions. Um, the Christian theologians began to include Greek philosophy into their own theology and their own theological schools. And so the process of including Greek philosophy into Christian theology was one that had started in previous generations. Thomas Aquinas was one of them in the early church father days, but the Renaissance really started to expand this use. And one of the reasons why is because the Christian idea of the second coming, where Jesus was going to come back before the end of the world uh, and change everything, and was going to be a glorious new kingdom of heaven on earth. When that failed to materialize, and it seemed to have been postponed, possibly indefinitely, they needed to update their theology, and so they borrowed from Greek philosophy in order to do so. Uh, this also meant that many thinkers expanded their views on ethics and community and human rights. But most of those philosophers were still members of the church, were still considered Christians. This is because open identification as an atheist could be dangerous. It might not even make sense to a lot of people who lived in a world where the church had so much power and activity. However, it was the Renaissance where many of those ideas that we think are important things like democracy and empiricism and this and natural rights that people had began to become more part of the discourse. So some of the important thinkers from this era would be Petrarch, also called the father of humanism, Desiderius Erasmus. I should have practiced saying that before we got started tonight, and Michel de Montaigne, all of whom would be very important writers, even though many of them were involved in theological schools, would be very important writers for what would come next in the development of humanism. And what came next was the Enlightenment, which I think sometimes is still a bit of a, patting ourselves on the back name for it in Western European traditions. But here we are. The Enlightenment happening between the 16th and 17th centuries advanced many concepts which were foundational to modern humanism. We mentioned some of them as having started in the Renaissance, but they really started to get fleshed out during this time period. So natural rights, uh, are referring to the inherent rights given by nature. So just because the fact that you're a human being, you have rights. Um, the social contract, the idea that government legitimacy doesn't come from divine authority, it comes from the consent of the governed. We all agree to participate in governance. And this also leads to democracy or constitutionalism. So governments have contracts with their people, and the powers are divided to protect people's rights. The separation of church and state also became much more of a concept being discussed during this time period, which reduced the power of religious institutions in government and public life. Now, this didn't happen equally everywhere, and there were many societies where the church maintained a significant level of control over things like the education system or healthcare or governance well into the 20th century. And in Canada, we actually had more of that remaining in certain areas of our country than even the United States did. Um, Religious tolerance, so freedom of belief, but especially moving away from enforced religious uniformity. So no longer were people required to be a member of a church in good standing in order to participate in polite society. Now we're looking at having a much more pluralistic public square that people from many different religions can participate in. And then, of course, an increased emphasis on science and empiricism. So using the scientific method, experiment, observation to help us understand the world. And this is when many advancements in that area began. So some of the important thinkers for the Enlightenment would be people like Voltaire, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Thomas Hobbes, and Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft was actually a major figure in early feminist thinking, and because of her, we had significant advancements in feminist thought into humanism and into other areas of what would later become our higher education systems. So I do encourage you to check those folks out. And now we come to modern humanism, and pretty much everything in the 20th century and onward has been what modern humanism is building. So, like I said, we have no single lineage. There were many secular communities that started to pop up all over the world that were based or inspired by the values of humanism that came up through to us through the Enlightenment. But uh, but it didn't start with a top-down, hierarchical structure the way that many religions are operating. It was much more grassroots. It spread and it started to become more accepted because people were putting in the work to make it more accepted in their societies. Um, the language also shifted in the 20th century, going from humanism to secular humanism. And this was actually something that was being done because atheism and non-belief was still seen and still is seen for some as an aberration or a deviation from normal human behavior. So applying the secular label was actually done by some politicians and many in the media in order to draw attention to, oh, no, no, this is bad because secular is bad and religious is good. Um, that didn't seem to take, it didn't seem to stick. And now when people say secular humanism, it doesn't seem to have the same negativity attached for most of us. Um, so modern humanism, modern secular humanism has become, especially with the advent of the internet and the ability for us to stay more connected with each other, it's become a worldwide movement for the non-religious. And even people in countries where being religious is still expected and where being non-religious can even be dangerous, we are seeing humanist groups emerge and begin to flourish. One of the reasons for this is the existence of Humanist International, which is an umbrella organization. Humanist Canada is a member organization of Humanist International. Humanist International, uh, it campaigns internationally on human rights issues, especially issues of freedom of thought and expression, the rights of non-religious people or other vulnerable minorities. Um, they've been heavily involved with the United Nations over the years as at the Geneva Assembly, in the Human Rights Council meetings, focusing on advocacy for not just humanist perspectives, but for minority groups opposing blasphemy laws, apostasy laws. Uh, Apostasy laws are laws that state it is illegal to leave the accepted public faith, whereas blasphemy laws are laws that say it's illegal to criticize or mock the accepted public faith. And their definition of criticize can be pretty broad when they need it to be in some societies. Humanist International also publishes the annual Freedom of Thought Report, which has recently come out again. If you haven't seen that, I encourage you to. This evaluates countries based on their treatment of non-religious people, their commitment to freedom of thought and expression, and other issues. So, if you haven't been aware till now, the World Humanist Congress is coming to Canada in August of 2026, and I hope to see some of you there. Now, I do want to draw attention to something, humanism and new atheism. Um, New atheism is not something that I defined earlier. Atheism, as we all know, is the lack of belief in a god or gods. New atheism was a movement that started in post 9/11 North America and the West. Um, After 9/11, there were a lot more conversations about the dangers of religion, and typically when they said religion, they were talking about Islam, but the new atheists, and especially the Four Horsemen, who were Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and Daniel Dennett, were people who were very public in criticizing all religion. And not only were they criticizing religion, they were claiming that religion was almost at an end. That as a society, we were evolving past it and we were going to be done with it soon. And as soon as we were done with it, everything was going to be better. And that was some high promises. And many of the books were written by these people had became bestsellers, and they actually did help in normalizing non-belief and increasing the amount of people who are willing to come out to describe themselves as secular. Prior to these books coming out, prior to this entering the public consciousness, it was more difficult for people, even in North America, to say, "Well, I'm actually an atheist." It was still considered acceptable to discriminate against atheists in some ways. And if you're interested in more research about this, Dr. Will Gervais from Brunel University in England has done a number of studies, and we actually have an episode of the podcast interviewing him, talking about atheism and trust, talking about atheism and how people who are given the choice between who they find more trustworthy will generally choose, convicted criminals over atheists, and all kinds of really fascinating studies that have been done on that issue. It's a great read, and I do encourage you to check it out. And I'll talk about his book again a little bit later. But these people did help to normalize non-belief in society. Their promise of a secular world in which there would be no more problems because religion was causing all of them, and I'm exaggerating slightly, it didn't quite materialize, but it did start to change even more rapidly in the last 20 years. And globally, we've experienced a lot of religious change. Um, when people use the word secularization, we are typically referring to two things when we're talking about the research. We're referring to the reduction of the number of religious people in a society and the reduction of the importance and influence of religion in a society. So some societies are more secularized than others. Canada is a pretty secularized country. Norway is even more secularized, and so are most of the Nordic countries. A country like Ireland is becoming more secularized, but for a long time it wasn't. And then the Czech Republic is another example of a country that has been very religious and is becoming more secular. Romania is another example that is beginning to undergo a process of increased rapid secularization. Uh, these are trends that are being captured around the world and in countries where up until recently they still had church-run schools and church-run hospitals. Now suddenly those things are being taken back into the public control. So I have a few statistics here on the screen. The proportion of people identifying as religious declined worldwide from 68% in 2005 to 56% in 2024. And the share of those identifying as not religious increased from 21% to 28%. Convinced atheists rose from 6% to 10%. So by 2060, according to Pew Research, they anticipate that the unaffiliated population is about going to be 1.2 billion people, which is a lot. Pew Research also indicated that they expect the total percentage of non-believers on our planet will actually be declining as higher birth rates among religious groups means that they are going to be having more children than us, and by default, the religious population will be increasing faster. So, if that's something you're concerned about, start having more kids or TBD. We can discuss later. We can brainstorm it as a group. Canada's landscape has also been changing, and this is a graph that I put together for one of our newsletters a couple years ago, where our Christian population from 2001 to 2011 to 2021 has been steadily decreasing from 77.1% all the way down to 53.3%. And our no religion or secular population went from 16.5% to 34.6%, almost a 20-point increase in 20 years. And 2031 is the next survey that was supposed to be uh, reflecting these numbers, but we actually just had one at the halfway point. You may have noticed that in your mailbox or on your front step recently, there was the long form social survey that we had to all fill out, and we might get some data back from that in the near future that shows additional changes. You can see that our other religion population has been increasing from about 6.4% to 12.1%. This is primarily through immigration. So we would look at immigrants coming from countries where Hinduism or Islam were primarily the accepted religion as being the source of this increase. We haven't really seen an increase through other means other than immigration. Um, so it's it's a little bit hard to determine sometimes if the secular population is going to go up or down based on people leaving religion. That's an area that I've been doing some work in and some research in, and that's something that is going to accelerate or decelerate based on world events that are hard to predict. The current events in the United States may actually have a bit of a backlash effect on the number of religious people in the United States. We've seen some research indicate that the rise of the alt-right has actually pushed many people either out of Christianity in the United States altogether or towards more progressive Christianity, both of which, in my opinion, are a win. So we will see what happens with that over the coming years. Now, as we look forward, I think it's important to talk about our shared values and the things that we not only hold in common with each other as humanists, but with all people of goodwill who want a good future for our species on this planet. And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube later and who may belong to one of those religious groups and who also feel like you want to um, do good in the world and make the world a better place for all of us, this part's for you too. Um, we're not so different after all, I think, in some ways, because we have many core values that are in common. Even though our source of truth might be different. So in a traditional religion, divine revelation might be where they get their source of truth, and we use scientific method or reason. We still have a strong commitment to working together for seeking truth. Our basis of morality is different. So there may be religious commands or a religious text for religious people, and we use empathy and human well-being. But many of those religious commands and many of those religious books and many religious people are also acting with empathy and focus on well-being of the people around them into the world. And we have many examples of charities run by religious groups in that regard. Um, the ultimate goals may be different. Some people might, in a traditional religious perspective, believe more in spiritual salvation or an afterlife, whereas humanists believe in finding fulfillment in the here and now. But that doesn't mean that we can't work together to make the world a better place in the here and now. Even if you think you're going to go to heaven later, you still got to live here till you get there. Might as well make the best of it. Um, and for our human nature, even though some religious groups do believe in an inherent sin nature or flaw in humanity, and secular humanism believes that we actually all have the potential for greatness, that doesn't prevent us from working together. It doesn't prevent us from trying to find the best in each other. And I've been involved now for some months in meeting with members of the Manitoba Multi-Faith Council who come from many different religious perspectives. And some of the conversations, there's certainly disagreement, but in many of the other conversations, we're talking about the ways that we can work together, the things that we need to find in common. And I've really enjoyed those conversations, and I have tremendous respect for a lot of the people who are going to those meetings and trying to work with people with different beliefs. I think it's important too to acknowledge. Oh, sorry, going to go back a few slides because my mouse got stuck. Uh, I think it's important to acknowledge what humanism isn't. And I hear a lot of things about humanism online on the internet, on our Facebook page, sometimes in the comments. Humanism is not anti-religion. We're not trying to cancel religion or snuff it out or get rid of it or eliminate it from society. People are probably always going to be religious somewhere, no matter how no matter how many societies get secularized. I think there's probably always going to be some religious people somewhere, even if they do eventually become a minority. I don't think that eliminating religion is the point. Humanism is not dogmatic or exclusivist. We don't just want to work with humanists. We want to work with everybody. Anybody who's willing to push the cart up the hill with us, as it were, we want to work with them. And then humanism is not nihilism. We don't think that nothing matters. We think that you matter and that we matter as a society, as a species. And I think it's important to try to do things that matter together. And so do a lot of humanists. So what humanism is an acknowledgement of the value of all human culture and knowledge. We're not coming in to prescribe the ways of living. We're coming in to try to make sure we can all live together. Humanism is a way for secular individuals to find meaning and participate in social action. A lot of people who leave religion find themselves at loose ends. They don't know what their life is about anymore. They don't know where they're going to find meaning and community. So humanism can be a place to do that, a place to find meaning in the world, a purpose to work towards, and a community to work towards it with. Humanism is also a foundation of advocacy for religious freedom and a pluralistic public square. I'm going to define this now as well. A pluralistic public square is an idea that society should be free and available for everybody to live in, to move between different belief systems if they wish, to believe or not believe as they wish, and to work towards fulfillment with the people that they care about, with each other, and to do so without restriction and without restricting each other, insofar as those actions they're taking are not harming others. We're trying to work together. And there are actually many examples of pluralistic public squares, going back all the way to the Roman Empire, where even though they weren't perfect, there were still attempts at governments to legislate areas where all religions could exist freely and where people from all religions could mingle and create and trade and do life together. So the Roman Empire was one example. The Mongol Empire, surprisingly enough, was actually another government that tried to put into place religious freedom. And then one that surprises a lot of the Americans I've talked to is the Islamic Golden Age, where the House of Wisdom that was opened in Baghdad, a university, one of the world's first universities, invited Christians and Jews and Muslims and people from all over the world to come and study and research together, and where significant advancements were made in things like engineering and mathematics and medicine that helped create the world that we have today. We wouldn't have some of the things that we have today without that golden age. And a lot of people just don't know about it. In a pluralistic public square, we all get to participate and we all get to have space. We're not trying to vie for one perspective over the others. We're trying to create a space where everybody can live equally and have freedom of thought and freedom of expression. When I searched around in humanist websites, humanist writings, humanist books, statements and speeches from humanist thinkers, I started writing down and making notes on what words were coming up often and what perspectives were being shared frequently by these writers and by these important thinkers. And these are just some of the values that kept coming up over and over again. Um, Environmental stewardship, justice and peace and compassion, dignity, freedom of belief, social responsibility, critical thinking, empathy. All of these were coming up over and over in writings by many of the thinkers that I mentioned previously, and others. But at the heart of all of it was a strong value in human rights. We believe that the human right for self-determination and our society to determine its direction together is fundamental to what it means to being a humanist. And I was so gratified to see such strong alignment between all those humanist thinkers and speakers and writers that I've been reading for so long, and and many of those values were ones that have been uh, have been found in religion and other writings around the world. So this is another area where we can also find to overlap with others and to work with them when we have the opportunity to. We all think that peace is a good idea. We all think that compassion is a good idea. So let's find ways to do that together. In terms of practice, there are a lot of places to go to enact humanism if that's something that you wish to do. Um, you can support places like Humanist International and Humanist Canada. You can come or promote to the World Humanist Congress. And if you can't come, you can share about it and you can tell people what happened at it. You can share our podcast episodes. You can share the Freedom of Thought report. Uh, you can help volunteer for some of these organizations as well. Humanist International and Humanist Canada are always looking for volunteers because we're volunteer-run organizations. So these are all ways that you can start to participate. And when you start to reach out to these groups, you can also find others who are willing to participate and then start doing things like opening new chapters of Humanist Canada. We're trying to get that going in Manitoba if we can get enough people. You can start looking at finding donors for Humanist Canada or Humanist International. You could look at finding ways to support your community as humanists. The Windsor chapter of Humanist Canada has adopted streets in Windsor and goes out to clean them regularly, which I think is a wonderful way to show people that they care. I also wanted to touch very briefly on that changing world we talked about earlier. One more reason, if you needed it, to think of humanism as a reason, as a way of working with others that we might disagree with, even come from very different worlds, if we have the same values. One more reason to do this is the global trend of the rise of fascism, which tends to attach itself to a particular brand of far-right, Eurocentric white Christian nationalism that's built on a foundation of something I'll call accountable free will individualism, which I can get into a little bit more later. But it's essentially the idea of an extreme individualism that um, is very focused on patriarchal, hegemonic cultural structures that really define themselves by power and authority. And I got to say, the rise of fascism is not just a threat for us as the non-religious. It's a threat for everybody who does not belong to that group, to that dominant, what we would call socio-ethno-religious group. We're all in danger. This is something that I've heard said at some of the other interfaith gatherings I've been to or seen. Everybody's in danger from this group if you don't belong to it. It's more important than ever for people of goodwill to find each other and work together. And I think that's what humanism can do is help create that neutral space for people to come and work together to resist this rise of fascism, which I think to me feels really imminent, and is one of the reasons why our theme for the Humanist Congress this year is humanism as resistance. So I'm going to finish with this slide and this quote from A.C. Grayling, and this slide is actually from some slides that Jan Lee gave me to help with preparing for tonight, and I just love the quote and the flowers together, so I kept it. So this is this is another quote from A.C. Grayling. He says, "In essence, humanism is the ethical outlook that says each individual is responsible for choosing his or her values and goals and working towards the latter in the light of the former, and is equally responsible for living considerately towards others, with a special view to establishing good relationships at the heart of life, because all good lives are premised on such." And I think that's a great way to end it off. I'll just finish with this. Our common values are more important than common beliefs. We're all in this together. So I hope that for all of us here who are humanists, we can find ways to work with each other and to work with others with common values for that future. If you want to do some further reading, here's some options. But for now, that's our presentation. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Daniel. That was absolutely wonderful.